Hey guys, today we are in the book of Philemon. Now, Philemon is the shortest book or the shortest letter that Paul wrote. And really, it's just a story. And even though it's the smallest, it's kind of the biggest, the most crazy letter that we see Paul write. And the best way, instead of walking through this, is really just to explain to you what this letter is about, okay? There's a man named Philemon. Philemon was a believer, probably heard Paul in Galatia and became a believer, and then moved and started a Christian, a church in Colossae. And so we see in verse 2 that he had a church meet in his house. So Philemon was a man of God, knew Paul, heard Paul, loved Paul, and he had a house church in his house. Now, along with these days, Philemon would have been a well-to-do person, and because he was a well-to-do person, he would have had slaves. One of those slaves, who this letter is about, is named Onesimus. Onesimus, and we're not sure exactly what happened, but there was a falling out between Philemon and Onesimus. Probably Onesimus stole something from Philemon and he ran away. Now, months, year later, we're not sure exactly what happened. Onesimus came to Paul in prison in Rome, looking for help, looking for forgiveness. While he was there, Onesimus became a Christian. He became a believer in Christ. You could imagine going to Paul, and Paul's definitely going to preach the gospel, right? And so he not only finds Jesus, but he stays and he serves Paul. He is a helper of Paul while Paul is in prison. And so what happens is, in this time, he is growing in the faith. He is, of course, has Paul as his discipler, which is amazing. But Paul understands, and probably Onesimus has come to the spiritual spot in his life that says, if I'm ultimately going to do things that are right, if I'm going to have absolute godly living, I need to go back to Philemon. And so here, Paul is sending Onesimus, this slave that has ran away, back to his slave owner in Colossae with this letter that we read today. Now, why is this so important? Why is this in the Bible? Because Paul is going to ask something of Philemon that is absolutely unheard of, and is ultimately the kind of crux of what the Bible really is. And so what happens is Onesimus is coming back to Philemon. He gets there and he hands him this letter from Paul. And this letter from Paul greets Philemon and says, hey, I've been praying for you. I hear about your faith. I hear about your church. Man, it's great. But in verse 6, it says, I pray that the sharing of your faith may become effective for the full knowledge of every good thing that is in us for the sake of Christ. That word sharing is the word koinonia, all right? Means fellowship. It means to share one in us. Why is that important? Paul goes on and asks Philemon to not just receive Onesimus and not just to forgive Onesimus, because he tells him that he has been saved. He has been discipled under Paul. He has been a helper of Paul. And so he says, don't just forgive Onesimus from stealing from you. Just don't forgive him from running away from you. But here it is. I want you to receive him as a brother. So think of what's going on, right? So here you have Philemon, who has the slave, who has treated him wrong. In Roman culture, has every right to demand him to be put in prison, probably demand to have him killed because he could have stole from him and ran away. But here Paul says, don't treat him bad. He is now not a slave to you. He is a brother. He is a brother in the Lord. So don't just receive him and forgive him for coming back, but now physically accept him as a brother. He once was a slave. Now he is free. This is putting together in real life, in real time, the words that Paul wrote in Colossians chapter 3 and verse 11. You remember where Paul says, in Christ, there is neither man nor woman, nor Jew, nor Gentile, nor slave, nor free man. We are all equal at the foot or at the bottom of the cross of Jesus Christ. So Paul is asking this crazy ask of Philemon to not just accept him back as a slave, but to accept him back as a brother, somebody who has wronged him, somebody who has ran away from him, but to forgive him. Ultimately, what Jesus Christ has done for us, right? And Paul goes on and he says, I appeal to you. I want you to do this. And notice he says in verse 14, but I preferred to do things without your consent in order that your goodness may not be compulsion, but of your own accord. Paul wants Philemon to choose the right thing. Now, Philemon could choose to forgive him, but still make him a slave. Paul could have wrote and said, you will not treat this man as a slave. He is your brother. And he probably would. But Paul wants Philemon to choose to do what is right in your heart. For this perhaps is why he escaped and ran away from you, that you might have him back forever as a Christian, right? So Paul says he's come back to you, not just as a slave in this world, but he has come back to you forever. He is equal. He is now a Christian as you are. No longer a bondservant, a slave, but more than a bondservant, as a beloved brother. He has come back to you as a brother. Especially to me, how much more to you, both in the flesh and in the Lord. He has come back to you in the flesh. You can physically receive him, but you can also spiritually receive him as a brother. Notice verse 17. So, if you consider me your partner, koinonia, same word. So, if you consider me to share, if you consider me a partner, receive him as you would receive me. If he has wronged you at all or owes you anything, charge that to my account. I, Paul, write this with my own hand. I will repay it. Paul gives him an IOU. And so what's happening here in real time is Paul is stepping in and he's being a Jesus. He's being a Messiah. He's being a mediator in between, right? You have Philemon, right, who has done nothing wrong. He was wronged by the slave. The slave stole from him. The slave ran away from him. And now Paul steps in and says, receive him, because now he's your brother. He's a Christian. And anything that he has done wrong, I'll pay the price. So as Paul says that he will pay the price, that's the same thing that Jesus Christ has done for us. That he stepped in the middle, in between God, who's done nothing wrong, and what we have done. We have brought wrong to God, and we have ran away from God. And Jesus steps in the middle and he says, I'll pay the price. Accept them. And God did what? He accepts us because of the work of the cross that Jesus paid for us. And that's exactly what Philemon will do with Onesimus. And that, even though it's a short letter, it brings in the true intent of the heart, that of understanding that we are all fallen short of the glory of God. And it is only through the work of Jesus, that reconciliation of the cross that Jesus Christ did, that brings us into the right standing, and that we are all equal at the foot of the cross because of Jesus Christ. Hope that makes sense. It's a great book. Even though it's short, it has such a powerful meaning. And in the day of reading this would have been just so mind-blowing. But it truly shows us what the heart of Christianity is all about. Hope that makes sense. And we will see you tomorrow in a new book in Hebrews. God bless.